camera opens on a pair of grease-stained hands trembling slightly as they hold a tarnished military medal against the harsh fluorescent lights of an old garage. The Purple Heart catches the light, its faded ribbon contrasting sharply with the black motor oil covering calloused fingers. Behind those hands, scattered across a concrete floor, lie the broken pieces of what was once the heart of a 1930s tractor engine. When I cracked open that rusted engine block, I never expected to find a Purple Heart medal hidden inside. The voice belongs to Zara Hendricks, and there's something raw in her tone that suggests this discovery changed everything. But what I discovered next about its owner changed my entire family's history forever. Zara stands in the doorway of what used to be her grandfather's auto repair shop, a place that smells like decades of motor oil, metal shavings, and forgotten dreams. At 28, she's got the kind of hands that tell stories. Scarred knuckles from years of wrestling with stubborn bolts, fingernails permanently stained despite scrubbing, and a confidence in her grip that comes from knowing exactly how much pressure to apply to coax life back into broken machinery. Her dark hair is pulled back in a messy bun, secured with what looks like a repurposed zip tie, and her coveralls hang loose over a frame that's stronger than it appears. There's grease smeared across her left cheek, and she's got that particular exhaustion that comes from physical work mixed with emotional weight. She's been carrying both for months now. The garage around her tells its own story of abandonment and potential. Sunlight streams through dust-covered windows, illuminating workbenches cluttered with tools her grandfather Emmett organized with military precision. Every wrench has its place, every part its purpose, but everything sits under a layer of neglect that makes the space feel like a museum of better times. My name is Zara, and 6 months ago I thought I knew everything about my family's history. She picks up a wrench from the workbench, testing its weight in her palm the way her grandfather taught her. I was wrong. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones hidden so deep that it takes breaking something apart completely to find them. The camera pulls back to reveal the full scope of her inheritance, a garage filled with the ghosts of her grandfather's 40-year career as the town's most trusted mechanic, and now, somehow, the keeper of a World War II soldier's final promise. 6 months ago, Zara's life looked completely different. She had a corner office on the 14th floor of a Columbus engineering firm, a reliable paycheck, and a clear path toward partnership. She wore pressed blouses instead of oil-stained coveralls, and her biggest daily challenge was managing project timelines, not coaxing life back into dead engines. But when her grandfather Emmett passed away suddenly from a heart attack, everything shifted. Emmett had raised Zara after her father died in a construction accident when she was 12. While her mother Celeste worked double shifts as a nurse to keep them afloat, Emmett became Zara's anchor. Every summer, every weekend, every school break was spent in this garage, learning that patience and persistence could fix almost anything. Grandpa always said that engines don't lie, Zara remembers, running her hand along his old workbench. People lie, paperwork lies, but an engine will tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen. The garage sits on 5 acres of rural Ohio land that Emmett bought in 1952, back when Millfield was still a farming community instead of the struggling post-industrial town it became. The property taxes alone are eating through Zara's savings, and her brother Dex calls every week from his real estate job in Cincinnati with the same argument. "Zara, you're being sentimental," he'd said just last Tuesday. "That place is a money pit. Sell it to the developers, take your half, and start over somewhere that actually has a future." But walking away feels like betraying everything Emmett taught her about seeing potential where others see problems. The garage still smells like his coffee and the particular blend of penetrating oil he mixed himself. His reading glasses still sit on the windowsill where he left them, next to a stack of repair manuals he'd annotated in his careful handwriting. Zara has been living in the small apartment above the garage, sleeping in the same room where Emmett used to plan his repairs and balance his books. Some nights, she lies awake listening to the building settle and wondering if she's making the biggest mistake of her life. She gave up a 6-figure salary to chase a dream that might not even be financially viable. The worst part is the loneliness. Emmett's customers occasionally stopped by, hoping he might still be around to fix their lawnmowers or troubleshoot their truck problems. Zara helps when she can, but word hasn't spread that she's taken over. Most days, she works alone, sorting through decades of accumulated parts, tools, and projects that Emmett never finished. I kept telling myself I was just organizing his things, getting the place ready to sell, Zara admits. But really, I was looking for something, some sign that staying here made sense, that I wasn't just hiding from real life in a dead man's garage. That's when she discovered the back shed. Emmett had always kept it locked, claiming it was just storage for seasonal equipment. But when Zara finally cut the rusted padlock, she found something that didn't belong in her grandfather's neat, organized world. The tractor sat like a sleeping giant under a rotting canvas tarp. When she pulled the covering away, rust flakes fell like snow, and the smell of decades-old decay filled the air. This wasn't just any old farm equipment. This was a 1930s John Deere Model A, the kind of machine that built America's agricultural backbone during the Depression. But it was in terrible condition. Weeds had grown up through the wheel spokes, creating an eerie garden around the machine. The metal was so corroded that touching it left orange residue on her fingers, and the engine looked like it had been sitting underwater for decades. "Mom, did Grandpa ever mention owning a tractor?" Zara asked when she called Celeste that evening. "A tractor? Honey, your grandfather barely had a lawn to mow. He fixed cars, motorcycles, the occasional boat engine, but he never farmed a day in his life. Are you sure it's his?" The question haunted Zara. Everything else in Emmett's garage was cataloged, organized, purposeful. He didn't keep junk or take on projects without clear plans. So why hide a massive, broken tractor for decades without ever mentioning it to his family? Standing in the shed that night, flashlight beam dancing across the tractor's rusted shell, Zara made a decision. That would change everything. She wasn't just going to restore this machine. She was going to solve the mystery of why her methodical, practical grandfather had kept such an enormous secret. "I guess I've always been drawn to puzzles," she reflects. "Engines are just mechanical. Puzzles. Figure out what's broken, fix it, make it run again." But this felt different. This felt like Grandpa left me a puzzle that was about more than just metal and bolts. The next morning, Zara cleared space in the main garage and began the massive job of moving the tractor inside. Her back ached for days afterward, but something about the physical challenge felt right. For the first time since Emmett's funeral, she had a purpose that felt bigger than just surviving another day of grief and uncertainty. She had no idea that buried deep inside that corroded engine lay a story that would connect her family to a hero they never knew existed, and reveal that her grandfather had been keeping someone else's most sacred promise for over 30 years. The tractor restoration became Zara's obsession, but it quickly turned into a nightmare that threatened to destroy everything she had left. Within the first week, Zara realized she was in over her head. The Model A wasn't just old, it was systematically destroyed by decades of neglect. Every component she touched crumbled or broke apart in her hands. The fuel tank had rusted through completely, the hydraulic lines had disintegrated, and the transmission looked like someone had filled it with concrete and left it to harden. "This is insane, Zara," her brother Dex said during one of his increasingly frequent visits. He stood in the garage doorway, careful not to step on the growing collection of rusted parts scattered across the floor. "You've been at this for 3 weeks and you haven't gotten a single thing working. Grandpa's been gone 6 months. It's time to be practical." But Zara couldn't explain the pull she felt toward this machine. Every morning she woke up thinking about the next repair, the next challenge to solve. It was like the tractor was communicating with her through its damage, telling her stories about its past through bent metal and seized mechanisms. The financial pressure mounted daily. Replacement parts for a 1930s John Deere weren't exactly stocked at the local auto parts store. A new carburetor cost $800. Hydraulic cylinders ran $1,200 each. The specialized tools she needed to machine custom parts were beyond expensive. They were investments that only made sense if she was planning to stay in the restoration business permanently. "Honey, you've spent $4,000 in 3 weeks, her mother Celeste said during a tense phone call. "That's more than some people make in 2 months. What happens when the money runs out?" Zara had been asking herself the same question every night as she lay in bed above the garage, listening to the building creak and settle around her. Her corporate savings account was bleeding money faster than she'd ever imagined possible. Property. Taxes were due in 2 months, and she still hadn't figured out how to generate income from the garage. The local machinist, Tobias Fletcher, became both her lifeline and her biggest source of frustration. A gruff man in his 50s who'd worked with Emmett for 20 years, Tobias knew every machine shop and parts supplier within 100 miles, but he also wasn't shy about expressing his doubts. Your grandfather was a smart man, Zara, but he wasn't sentimental about junk, Tobias told her while examining a cracked engine mount. If he kept this tractor hidden for 30 years instead of scrapping it, he had a reason. Maybe you should think about what that reason was before you bankrupt yourself trying to bring it back. The comment stung because it echoed Zara's own growing fears. What if she was projecting meaning onto a project that was simply beyond her abilities? What if her grandfather had hidden the tractor because it was unsalvageable, not because it was precious? The isolation made everything worse. Zara's engineering colleagues had stopped calling after she repeatedly declined their invitations to networking events and happy hours. Her college friends lived hours away and couldn't understand why she'd given up a promising career to play with old farm equipment in the middle of nowhere. "You're becoming a hermit," her best friend Valencia warned during a rare phone call. "When's the last time you went somewhere that didn't smell like motor oil? When's the last time you talked to someone who wasn't trying to sell you tractor parts?" The worst moments came late at night when doubt crept in like cold air through the garage's gaps. Zara would stand next to the partially disassembled tractor, overwhelmed by the scope of work still ahead. She'd taken apart so much that putting it back together seemed impossible. The engine block sat like a rusted heart in the center of her workspace, taunting her with its complexity. "Maybe Dex is right," she whispered to herself one particularly dark evening in November. "Maybe I'm just hiding from reality in here." But something kept her going. It was more than stubbornness, though she had plenty of that. Every small victory, a freed bolt, a cleaned part, a mechanism that moved for the first time in decades, felt like a conversation with both the machine and her grandfather's memory. She was learning things about metalwork and restoration that no engineering textbook had ever taught her. The real breaking point came when she finally reached the engine block itself. After 2 months of peripheral repairs, she'd run out of easier projects. The engine was the heart of the machine, and it was completely seized. Tobias had warned her that the block was likely cracked beyond repair, which would make the entire restoration worthless. "You're going to have to decide how much you're willing to lose," he told her bluntly. "Engine work at this level isn't just expensive, it's a gamble. You could spend $5,000 and still end up with scrap metal." Zara stared at the engine block for hours that night, knowing that her next decision would determine not just the fate of the tractor, but her entire future. She could walk away now, cut her losses, and still have enough money left to start over somewhere else. Or she could commit completely, knowing that failure would leave her broke and possibly homeless. The engine block sat silent under the garage lights, keeping whatever secrets it held locked away behind layers of rust and seized metal. But something in its stubborn, damaged presence reminded Zara of herself. Broken down, forgotten, but maybe not beyond saving. She just had to be brave enough to find out what was really inside. For 3 days, Zara avoided the garage entirely. She drove around Millfield's empty downtown, past boarded storefronts and the rusted remains of what used to be the town's economic backbone. She sat in diners nursing coffee that tasted like burnt regret, watching farmers and factory workers who seemed to know exactly where they belonged in the world. The engine block haunted her thoughts. She'd stripped away everything else on the tractor, cleaned the frame, rebuilt the hydraulics, restored the steering mechanism, even fabricated new floor panels from scratch. But all of that work was meaningless if the heart of the machine couldn't be saved. The engine block was her Mount Everest, and she was running out of oxygen. "You look like hell," Tobias observed when she finally returned to his machine shop on Thursday morning. "Been thinking about what I said?" "I can't stop thinking about it," Zara admitted, "but I also can't walk away, not yet." Tobias studied her face for a long moment, then walked to a cabinet filled with specialized tools. Your grandfather used to get that same look when he was working on something that mattered more than money. Stubborn as a mule, that man was. He pulled out a hydraulic engine splitter, a massive piece of equipment that looked more like a medieval torture device than a precision tool. This'll crack that block open clean, if that's what you're determined to do. But Zara, once you split an engine block, there's no going back. You better be sure you're ready for whatever you find inside. The weight of the splitter surprised her as they loaded it into her pickup truck. This wasn't just a tool, it was a commitment device, a point of no return made manifest in steel and hydraulic pressure. That evening, Zara called the one person who might understand her grandfather's mindset better than anyone. Vernon Kozlov had worked alongside Emmett for 15 years before retiring to Millfield Manor, the town's only nursing home. At 89, Vernon's body was failing, but his mind remained sharp as a machinist's blade. "Vernon, it's Zara, Emmett's granddaughter. I need to ask you something about the way Grandpa thought about his work. Little Zara, last time I saw you, you were maybe 16, arguing with your grandfather about why carburetors were better than fuel injection." Vernon's laugh turned into a coughing fit that lasted nearly a minute. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" Grandpa always said that engines tell stories. What did he mean by that? The silence stretched long enough that Zara wondered if Vernon had fallen asleep. Then his voice came back, softer and more serious. "Your grandfather believed that every machine carries the memory of its use. The wear patterns, the modifications, the repairs, they're like reading someone's diary. Emmett could look at an engine and tell you if the owner was careful or careless, desperate or prosperous, whether they loved that machine or just used it." Vernon paused, and Zara could hear the institutional sounds of the nursing home in the background. Television shows, medication carts rolling down hallways, the distant murmur of other conversations. But there was something else Emmett used to say. Sometimes you gotta break things apart to understand what really happened. He meant that the most important stories are hidden in places where people didn't expect anyone to look. After hanging up, Zara sat in the garage for 2 hours, staring at the engine block and trying to decode whatever message her grandfather might have left for her. The massive piece of cast iron sat on her workbench like a puzzle box, its exterior giving no hints about what might lie within its frozen mechanisms. The next morning, she began her preparation with the methodical care Emmett had taught her. She documented everything with her phone camera, the position of each bolt, the orientation of every component, the exact sequence she would need to follow if she ever hoped to reassemble the engine successfully. She called her mother to let her know what she was planning. "You're going to destroy the engine completely?" Celeste's voice carried that particular mixture of concern and exasperation that mothers reserve for children making decisions they can't support but can't prevent. "Not destroy, Mom. Investigate. There's something different about this tractor. Grandpa kept it hidden for a reason, and I need to know why. What if there's nothing special about it? What if it's just an old tractor that someone abandoned and your grandfather felt too guilty to throw away?" The question cut deeper than Celeste probably intended. What if Zara was inventing meaning where none existed? What if her grandfather's secrecy was just old man eccentricity, and she was about to destroy the engine based on romantic fantasies about hidden mysteries? "Then I'll have learned something about myself," Zara replied, though her voice lacked conviction. She spent the weekend gathering her courage and triple-checking her approach. The hydraulic splitter was designed to crack engine blocks along their natural seam lines, but the process was irreversible and unforgiving. If she positioned it wrong, she could shatter the entire block into unsalvageable pieces. Sunday evening, she called Dex to tell him what she was planning. "Are you having some kind of breakdown?" he asked. "You quit your job, you're burning through your savings, and now you want to destroy the one thing you've been working on for months? This isn't healthy, Zara." "Maybe it's not healthy," she said, "but it's necessary. I can't explain it better than that." Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of November weather that makes everything feel like an ending. Zara positioned the hydraulic splitter with trembling hands, double-checking the alignment against the casting marks on the engine block. The splitter's arms embraced the massive piece of iron like a mechanical hug that would either reveal its own secrets or destroy them forever. She connected the hydraulic pump and tested the pressure. The machine hummed with contained power, ready to apply thousands of pounds of force to metal that had been fused together for nearly a century. "Okay, Grandpa," she whispered to the empty garage. "If you left me a message, I'm ready to hear it." Her finger hovered over the pump's activation switch. Once she pressed it, there would be no undoing what happened next. The engine block would crack open like a metallic egg, and whatever lay inside would either justify months of obsession or confirm that she'd been chasing ghosts in a dead man's garage. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the county road, probably heading to the feed store or the equipment dealer. Normal people doing normal work while she prepared to risk everything on a hunch that might be nothing more than grief-fueled delusion. Zara pressed the switch. The hydraulic pump engaged with a mechanical whine that filled the garage with purposeful noise. Pressure built slowly, methodically, as the splitter's arms began to push against metal that had been solid for decades. At first, nothing happened. The engine block sat immobile, defying the machine's efforts to pry it apart. Then, with a sound, like thunder trapped in metal, something deep inside began to give way. The engine block split with a sound like breaking thunder, metal separating along seam lines that had been fused for nearly 90 years. Zara stepped back instinctively as the hydraulic splitter completed its work, leaving the two halves of the engine lying open like the pages of a book written in cast iron and rust. For a moment she saw only what she expected, cylinders caked, with ancient oil residue, pistons frozen in place, the mechanical carnage of decades without maintenance. Then something caught the light that didn't belong among the engine components. A small bundle wrapped in what looked like oiled leather sat nestled in a cavity that should have been filled with moving parts. The package was roughly the size of her fist, bound with wire that had somehow resisted the corrosion that claimed everything else around it. Zara's hands shook as she carefully extracted the bundle. The leather wrapping felt strange, too well preserved, too deliberately placed, to be accidental debris. Someone had put this here intentionally, hiding it in the one place nobody would ever look unless they were completely rebuilding the engine from scratch. She set the package on her workbench under the brightest light in the garage and began unwrapping it with the same careful precision her grandfather had taught her for handling delicate electrical components. The wire came away easily, as if whoever had placed it knew it would eventually need to be opened. Inside the leather wrapping lay 3 items that made her breath catch in her throat. The first was a purple heart medal, its purple ribbon faded, but still vibrant against the tarnished bronze. The medal felt heavier than she expected, substantial in a way that spoke to its importance. Engraved on the back in careful military lettering were the words, PFC Thomas J. Whitmore, United States. Army, 1944. The second item was a small glass vial, no bigger than her thumb, filled with dark soil and sealed with wax. The glass was thick and hand-blown, the kind used for medicines or chemicals in an era before mass production made everything uniform. The third item was a folded piece of paper, yellow with age but still intact thanks to the oil-treated leather that had protected it. Zara's hands trembled as she unfolded it, revealing handwriting in fading blue ink that had somehow survived 8 decades hidden inside an engine block. The note was brief but devastating in its simplicity. If you're reading this, I didn't make it home from France. This dirt is from our farm, the southeast corner where May used to pick wildflowers every spring morning before school. Please return it to the land at 1247 Ridgefield Road, Millfield, Ohio. Tell my daughter May that I kept my promise to always come home to her, even if it takes longer than we both hoped. She'll understand. Thank you for finishing what I couldn't. Thomas J. Whitmore, June 6, 1944. Zara read the note 3 times before the full impact hit her. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Thomas Whitmore had written this note on the morning of the Normandy invasion, somehow knowing he might not survive to deliver his promise personally. But the address stopped her cold. 1247, Ridgefield Road was her grandfather's property. This garage, this land, the place where she'd been living for 6 months, it had once been Thomas Whitmore's family farm. Her hands shaking, Zara pulled out her phone and called her mother. Mom, what was Grandpa's address before he bought the garage property? Why would you need to know that? He lived on Ridgefield Road his whole adult life, bought that land right after he got back from Korea in 1952. Zara, you're scaring me. What's wrong? The land Grandpa bought in 1952. Do you know who he bought it from? Celeste's voice grew sharper, with concern. I think it was a bank sale. Some farm that went under during the war. Honey, what is this about? Zara ended the call and immediately began searching online for Thomas Whitmore's service record. What she found made her legs go weak. Private First Class, Thomas J. Whitmore, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, had been killed on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, the same day he'd written the note now sitting on her workbench. Further, searching revealed that the Whitmore farm had been foreclosed in 1946, 2 years after Thomas's death. His widow, Helen Whitmore, had moved to Cleveland with their 4-year-old daughter, May, unable to maintain the property alone during wartime shortages and economic hardship. But the most shocking discovery came when Zara found May's obituary from 1998. May Whitmore had lived her entire adult life in Cleveland, working as a seamstress and raising 3 children as a single mother after her husband died in a factory accident. The obituary mentioned that she'd often spoken about her father's promise to return from the war and how she'd never stopped believing he'd somehow keep his word. May had died without ever knowing that her father had kept his promise after all. Zara called Vernon at the nursing home, her voice barely controlled. Vernon, I need you to tell me the truth about something. Did my grandfather ever mention finding anything unusual when he was working on old equipment? The pause stretched long enough that Zara wondered if the call had dropped. Then Vernon's voice came back, weighted with decades of carefully kept silence. He found something in that tractor, didn't he? You knew. Emmett told me about it maybe 10 years ago, when his health was starting to turn. Said he'd been carrying a secret that was too heavy for one man, but he couldn't figure out how to set it down properly. He tried to find the soldier's family, spent months at the library going through records. But this was before the internet made everything searchable. Vernon's breathing was labored, but his words came clear and steady. Your grandfather was a good man, Zara, but he was also careful. He didn't want to cause more pain by approaching the wrong people with the wrong story. He kept hoping he'd find the right way to honor what that soldier had hidden. The magnitude of what her grandfather had carried alone for 30 years hit Zara like a physical blow. Emmett had found Thomas's final message and spent decades trying to figure out how to deliver it properly. He'd been the guardian of a stranger's most sacred promise, waiting for the right moment or the right person to help him fulfill it. He was waiting for you, Vernon said quietly. Emmett always said you had the patience and the heart for the kind of work that really mattered. Maybe he knew you'd be the one to finish what Thomas started and what he couldn't complete. Sitting in the garage, surrounded by the scattered pieces of Thomas Whitmore's hidden legacy, Zara finally understood why she'd felt so compelled to restore this particular machine. It wasn't just about fixing an engine or honoring her grandfather's memory. She'd been chosen to complete a story that had been waiting 80 years for its proper ending. The Purple Heart lay on her workbench, catching the light from the fluorescent fixtures overhead. Thomas Whitmore had managed to send his love across 8 decades, through the chaos of war and the patient guardianship of a man who'd never even known his name. Now it was Zara's turn to deliver a message that had been traveling toward home since the morning of D-Day, carried by strangers who understood that some promises are too important to let die with the people who make them. Finding Thomas Whitmore's family required detective work that made engine restoration look simple. Zara spent 3 sleepless nights tracking genealogy records online, following a trail of birth certificates, marriage licenses, and obituaries that stretched from rural Ohio to the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. May Whitmore had married twice after the war, first to Robert Chen in 1961, then to David Morrison after Robert's death in 1978. She'd raised 5 children and worked as a seamstress until her arthritis made the fine work impossible. But according to every family record Zara could find, May had never stopped talking about her father's promise to come home from the war. The breakthrough came when Zara found a 2019 wedding announcement in Portland's newspaper. Vera Whitmore Chen, May's granddaughter, had married a local teacher named Michael Santos. The announcement included a photo of Vera holding what the caption described as her great-grandfather's military portrait from World War II. Zara stared at that newspaper photo for 20 minutes, knowing she was looking at Thomas Whitmore's great-granddaughter. Vera had his same determined jawline, the same direct gaze that looked like it could see through problems to solutions. Making. The phone call required more courage than splitting the engine block had. Hello, is this Vera Santos? This is going to sound crazy, but I think I have something that belonged to your great-grandfather, Thomas Whitmore. The silence on the other end lasted so long that Zara wondered if Vera had hung up. Then a shaky voice replied, How do you know that name? My great-grandfather died in World War II. There's nothing left of his belongings. There is now. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. Vera cried when Zara read Thomas's note aloud over the phone. She cried harder when she learned that her grandmother May had lived and died on the same land where her father had grown up, never knowing how close she'd been to his final message. My grandmother used to drive us past rural properties when we were kids, Vera told Zara through tears. She'd point to old farmhouses and say, That looks like the kind of place Daddy would have chosen. We thought she was just being nostalgic, but maybe she was being guided home without knowing it. 2 weeks later, Vera arrived in Millfield with her 6-year-old twins, Lucas and Emma. The meeting took place in Emmett's garage, with the restored tractor gleaming under the fluorescent lights, every component rebuilt, every surface polished, to reveal the machine's original beauty. This is incredible, Vera whispered, running her hands along the tractor's green paint. It looks exactly like the one in my great-grandfather's old photographs. But the real ceremony happened outside, under the massive oak tree that had somehow survived the transition from working farm to auto repair shop. According to county records, the tree had been planted in 1923, the year Thomas and Helen Whitmore bought the property as newlyweds. Daddy always said this tree would watch over the farm long after we were gone. Vera read from one of May's letters that she'd brought along. Maybe he was more right than he knew. Together, they scattered Thomas's carefully preserved soil around the oak's roots. The dirt looked no different from any other soil, but knowing it had traveled from this exact spot to Normandy and back again made the moment feel like completing a circle that had been broken for 8 decades. Lucas, Vera's son, looked up at his mother with the serious expression that children reserve for moments they sense are important, but don't fully understand. Mom, why are you crying? Because sometimes people keep promises even when it takes longer than anyone expected, Vera replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. After the ceremony, Vera insisted that Zara keep the restored tractor. My great-grandfather hid his promise in this machine because he trusted it to survive long enough for the right person to find it. You're that person, Zara. This tractor belongs here, on this land, with someone who understands what it means to honor the past while building something new. The restoration project had cost Zara nearly $8,000 in 4 months of her life, but standing next to the completed tractor with Thomas's family, she realized she'd gained something immeasurably more valuable than money. She'd found her purpose. Within 6 months, Hidden Stories Garage became known throughout Ohio as the place to bring vintage equipment with mysterious histories. Farmers arrived with tractors that had been in their families for generations, curious about the stories their machines might tell. Classic car enthusiasts sought out Zara's services because word had spread that she approached restoration like archaeology, uncovering the human stories embedded in metal and machinery. Every machine that comes through here teaches me something about the people who used it, Zara explains to customers who ask about her methods. Wear patterns show how someone worked. Modifications reveal their ingenuity. Careful maintenance speaks to love and respect. Neglect tells its own story about changing times and shifting priorities. The Purple Heart medal sits in a place of honor in the garage's front office, accompanied by Thomas's photograph and the story of how his promise finally made it home. Visitors often read the display and ask about the tractor, which Zara keeps in working condition and drives every spring to plant wildflowers in the field behind the garage. Thomas wanted his daughter to know he kept his promise. Zara tells them. But what I learned is that some promises are bigger than the people who make them. His promise became my grandfather's responsibility, and then it became mine. Now it's part of this place's story forever. The business thrives because Zara brings something unique to restoration work. The understanding that machines carry emotional weight beyond their mechanical function. She's helped families reconnect with their heritage through restored tractors, motorcycles, and cars that their ancestors used to build lives and livelihoods. But perhaps more importantly, she's found peace with her decision to leave corporate engineering behind. Every morning she wakes up in the apartment above the garage and feels the satisfaction of work that connects her to something larger than quarterly profit reports and performance metrics. I used to think success meant climbing ladders in tall buildings, she reflects while adjusting the carburetor on a 1940s Farmall tractor that arrived last week. But real success is about becoming the kind of person who can be trusted with other people's most important stories. The restored John Deere sits nearby, its green paint gleaming under the shop lights, no longer carrying hidden secrets, but openly displaying its connection to the land it once worked and the promise it helped fulfill. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the garage is quiet, Zara sits on the tractor's seat and imagines Thomas Whitmore hiding his metal inside the engine block, trusting that someday, someone with the right combination of curiosity and stubbornness would find it and understand what needed to be done. She'd been that someone, though she'd never expected her greatest discovery would come not from building something new, but from taking something old completely apart and finding the human heart that had been hidden inside all along. Thomas Whitmore had kept his promise to come home. Emmett had kept his promise to honor a stranger's sacrifice. And Zara had learned that sometimes the most important work isn't about fixing what's broken, it's about revealing what was always meant to be found. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in the power of keeping promises across generations, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the incredible things people leave behind. And remember, sometimes the most valuable discoveries aren't the ones we're looking for. They're the ones waiting patiently for us to be ready to find them.